Oh no. Wow, I should have checked that earlier. Wow. I was just talking for 30 minutes, friends, and I apologize that that must have been off the whole time on the intro. Damn, I should have checked that earlier. Well, we're here now. We had a good talk for 30 minutes. We had a good talk on the passion, on Christ's passion, and I guess we'll go into what we were talking about again as we walk back to sorry, I'm just checking this, making sure it's all on. Should be on now. Yeah, it is. I do apologize, everyone, that that's been so long. But where we are, do we walk back the way we can? Maybe we do. We are on Wentworth Falls. Hopefully that's coming through loud and clear to you. We were speaking for half an hour on what we've been talking about today. What I think we might do is I think we're just going to walk back the way we came, maybe. Or, I don't know, let's just keep walking on. And so today, where we're going today, as you can see down there, is the Lake of Wentworth Falls. And what we've been talking about for the last half an hour while the intro screen's been on is Christ's passion. What we're going to do first is we'll walk for a little bit longer. Then we'll go back this way. Then we're going to pull up and do our reading of Rudolf Steiner's text, The Redemption of Thinking. Then after that, we're going to walk down to Empress Falls. This lake down here rolls downward into the cliff side in the Blue Mountains, and so that should be a nice view. This is a nice property here, some chap that lives on the riverside. And so, okay, I guess I'll revisit what we were talking about. We were talking about the stages of Christ's passion. And how, and after that, by the way, once we get to Empress Falls, we're going to do our final segment where we review some videos and react to them. So there's 2 stops, 2 walks, 2 stops. And it was good last time. It was a good segment last time, so we're going to do it again. View some beautiful nature on the way down. And so on Christ's passion, foot washing is the first step, the first stage of that. And in the passion, it's presupposed in the miracles. There are sort of 3 stages. There's the Beatitudes, Christ's word, Christ's miracles, and the signs speak to the passion that is to come, which is the 7th thing, the 7th, which is all the miracles together, including the Lazarus rising one, and the healing of the macrocosm. And so in this, we experience this in a way in initiation, in a very real way, in the deep contemplation of what occurs, as Unseen Warfare talks about. We deeply contemplate. Oh, there's another path here. I don't know where this one goes. We deeply contemplate the events and the different stages, the foot washing, the scouring, the crowning with thorns, the cross-bearing. The crucifixion. The entombment. The resurrection. And so we are to, in of course, a lesser way, to go through the same thing. And each step applies to what one goes through in purification, illumination, union. This is theosis. You're not becoming some random God, you're becoming like Christ, and that involves a identification, becoming with what happens to him, you could say, as well. And so that's experienced in an inner and outer way, as we'll go into as we talk about it. And so this foot washing is first experienced and occurs in purification. Not sure how far we can walk along here, but I just wanted to have a look. Looks like people have been treading here before, doing their fishing or whatnot. Maybe that's about as far as we go. And so foot washing is fundamentally different from any other type of spirituality. Religions, quote unquote, which aren't really religions at all. There's only one real religion. The others are characterized by the fleeing serpent upwards to bliss outside of the woes of the eternal recurrence, or the enthroning of the will to power and the hegemony of the will to power, which characterizes black occultism, which characterizes anyone who seeks a life of essentially the terminus, the self-terminus, self-ending of the transcendent self. Terminus, you know what I mean by terminus? That's what happened to Nietzsche. Through his identification the wrong way around. But you can also make the mistake that the East makes in this when they don't take on the principle of foot washing and instead flee upward. They terminus the empirical self. We, of course, in this process of collaborative, passive, active concentration without effort in prayer, by passing it on, when we'll go into what foot washing is, by passing it on, they find a terminus in the empirical self, we ennoble it. And so it becomes two seers in union. Two seers in union. Their way is the way of depersonalization. Our way is the ennoblement. The Master came, the Lord came, so we could have life abundantly, not to seek the center of the wheel, not to seek the center of the snake eating its own tail in a bliss. There's a higher thing than that. It's called beatitude, which is not just the harmony and rhythm of the soul, spirit, and body. It is the presence of the divine being himself, the beatific vision. It's a higher. And one way is the experiencing of his breath, the breath of the real, of faith. It's above the calm waters of nirvana, beyond that. And so here's something we looked at the first time we came around, when we basically talked about all this stuff to begin with. Just looks like the kids use that tree to jump off that in summer. Might as well show it again. That's one thing I probably could never have done a while ago, or would have had a lot of trouble with repeating something I've just gone through. I really had trouble doing that a second time if I forgot to record or something. But, so there's foot washing. And we should deeply, deeply, deeply contemplate the passion. It must become actually part of our practice. But before that occurs, we need to be purified. It can't just be something, especially if it involves any type of, because you can't just contemplate the passion as a propositional affair. You do need to sort of see what is occurring, which Unseen Warfare, which is edited by 2 Orthodox saints, recommends that. Whether that says that those 2 editors approve of a visualizing of it is another question. But that would have to come, or should come, after a long while of purification with concentration, without effort, in prayer, praying the Jesus prayer, watchfulness, united with the breath and the name of Jesus, as the quote from the Philokalia says. Lots of that first. And a good representation of that is also the symbol of the coin. What does a coin do? You exchange it for, it's a representation of value, right? You exchange it for real goods. And so what we need to do, that's the imagistic unconscious that we have to purify. You know, when people have the term, can't unsee this, there's a deep truth to that. The unconscious has a valuative power. It's imagistic. When you go below the level of facticity, this openness space that we are in, to our collective unconscious, or when you go, and you do that by going within, it's also below and beneath facticity, the world that we share. We extend beyond ourselves. We're not in our body, or not just in our body. And that's where this valuative power is. And don't get me wrong, it's not all illusion. It's a mix of both, and it needs to be dissolved. And it is done so in a foot washing, which is the first stage of the passion. And so what happens? Well, in the order in which they were formed, the of your first half of your life are dissolved. You come through, man, it's all good. And, well, because they're almost always, they're locked up with the will to power. I don't think I'll walk through there. And what happens? Well, the coin that is your unconscious, this valuative representative space, instead of becoming a half truth, it becomes a full truth. And the coin is dissolved to, and it gets you in deeper layers of closer to reality as well, and becomes exchanged for real value, an objective conscience. Who is he? The true reality. And then you stop becoming arbitrary. Your values aren't arbitrary based on your goals and whatever you lusted after in temporality. They're somewhere, something higher. And that is done collaboratively, as I've talked about many times before. And so, I mean, it happens almost immediately if you are in the mode of passive active, if you're not trying to grasp and take in your concentrations, if you're finding, you're doing as I describe and as is described by, it's described by many others, and in prayer with the right frame of mind, then the angeloi serve you. And that's the proper arrangement of a hierarchy. Not a low, like a socialist arranges things with a fake will to service. It's not to be done by the empirical self. It's only when you know what divine will is, really. You don't have a king like Charles operating as some NGO, woke NGO, essentially. Fake service, which is really provoked by hidden masters that aren't even human. It's technical, it's satanic, fake. It doesn't have, there's no, because the divine, a technical government doesn't know ultimately what is best for everyone, or what's good for every individual. Of course, there are angeloi for everyone that lobby for them, and your guardian angeloi is constantly lobbying for you. But the point is, there's some ducks there, I thought I'd shoot. Oh. But the point is, and these are things I talked about before, so that's why it's running through my memory. How good was that the first time? Should I even bring that up? The point is, or a point is, we need to be fundamentally dedicated to disclosing divine will for ourselves, which comes from objective conscience. Because the whole error with the world, and it's an extreme error to try and act something technically without our government and our governors do not have access to divine will. They should. We should be ruled by initiates. We should be ruled by a priesthood to determine in every case. All our laws and all our judges should be in touch with objective conscience through these deep contemplative practices in union with Christ. That's how a judgment is actually supposed to be made. You have doxa, a collection of all the facts, an argumentative debating back and forth. I think that's dianoia. And you have an episteme, which is an intuitive grasp of everything that's occurred, and which is part of the judgment. And that's as far as Plato's judgment went. Episteme was it, because that was based on what has been of the past. And don't get me wrong, episteme is intuition. It's a high faculty, but it's missing the last thing, which is the person's future. Providence, which only providence knows. The person's future, what is that? It's mercy. But what do we experience in our society now? Toxic empathy. That's not mercy. It can only be given not by a low sort of sympathy, a low empathy, but by the divine contact with providence. And the Lord will give you the intuition or even tell you what to do, because he knows what the possibility of that person's ultimate future is. That's mercy. So when people think around that Christianity is this toxic empathy, no, that's the demon that's sprung up. It's only supposed to come from true objective conscience, which is why, for the most part, men are best at doing all these things, really. But even they can be too ruthless because they're not contacting with Christ. They don't know the future of the person they're dealing with. And this is even shown in science, in game theory, that the best strategy is a forgiveness strategy, actually. A strategy for survival, not just a tit for tat, but a forgiveness tit for tat in game theory. Well, but that's only on a minor scale. A few forgivenesses and then you stop, right? You don't just keep doing it. But in this case, the faculty that we are aligning with and what everyone really should and will more and more in the future is providence. And he already knows what that person's capable of and their future could be. And that's what actual mercy is. It doesn't operate without a true conscience. And we don't have conscience in modernity. It requires deep meditation and purification to have access to it. Otherwise, we actually just operate We're judging all the time, of course, but we operate off our prejudices and character. That's not what conscience is. Conscience is outside of that. And so how do you do that? Well, there are a few different ways. But, of course, the key way is concentration without effort, is the tradition, purification, illumination, union, and the practices that are related to the oaths of poverty, obedience, and chastity. And so you can see here how the lake goes down here, and that goes all the way down, or this water eventually goes all the way down to the waterfalls, I think, that we're going to see later. And I was saying when I came here first time, because I started the stream here an hour ago, and it was stuck in the intro phase, I apologize for that. But I was talking about how when you see sometimes, we see when you see a chaotic pattern ripple across, when the wind ripples across the water, it's a great symbol for the brooding, when the spirit is on the face of the waters, I believe the quote is. I can't remember the exact quote from Genesis. And that's true of the spirit. It broods. It's like a hen over eggs. It's something that comes from, well, it comes from within, doesn't it? I mean, it's not always the case that that's the case, but because the miraculous can occur, of course. A creation ex nihilo, and I apologize about the sound. I'll have to see whether the noise cancelling's on. But that's quite nice from here, isn't it? The view of the shoreline. We're up quite high here in the Blue Mountains. That's probably very noisy. But well, onward. Hopefully the noise cancelling is working on these mics. And so, there's only one way to have access to conscience. There's no way to have access to objective conscience because it's divine communication through the Eastern way. That's the destruction of conscience. It has to be, the ground of reality is moral. You can't abandon the empirical self. You can do that and leave it's essentially like going to the center of the wheel rather than getting outside the wheel. You can think about it like that. It's an ecstasy going inward on its own, whereas Christianity is both at the same time. It's ecstasy and ecstasy at the same time. For the dual sight. And so foot washing. Well, this is the natural hierarchy. It's the natural way of things in the eternal. What is above serves what's below. An angel has an angel above them. An archangel has you could call it a principality above them. Principality has a power above them, exousiai, and so on. And the upper serves the lower. And that's why so deeply that foot washing scene, when it's approached properly, is so moving and holy and divine. People might look at that from the will to power perspective, from the mortal perspective, thinking it's just a man, even thinking, oh, Jesus is just a sage or something. And it's cucky. Oh, look at this. If you saw a king doing it, it seems cucky, right? No, not when you understand deeply in a level of your being. That is, when you understand something, not in a propositional way of knowing it, when you have a subtle transformation at the ground of your being, that's a deep understanding of something. You've been transformed to a degree. That understanding, when you have that, well, you deeply feel and see that, well, of course you know that it's God. When God's doing it, well, what's that like? It's like a king or a father cleaning a sheep's feet or its child's feet. And deeply moving for that reason. God of all the universe is here cleaning men's feet. Of course, he's a man at the same time, but he's the perfect man. We mustn't forget that. There is a problem. I don't know if I've talked about this twice now, because I think I talked about it the first time when the thing was off, but I think some people have a problem recognizing they try to cast too much Christ as a kind of lower man rather than the perfect man, because he's God and the perfect man. Of course, there's the other problem, just saying he's only God. He's definitely man as well, but he's the perfect man. And so this is why I think the tradition is right when the tradition says that Christ didn't laugh. And if you speak to monastics, I think they'd agree with that. They'd agree with that tradition. Because there's a kind of absurdity in laughter. It's finding something occurring, even when you're tickling someone. Absurdity is occurring in reality. And when you are truth itself, well, nothing's absurdity. There's tragedy, and then there's the truth that you want people to recognize and find. And so, yeah, there's many other reasons why I think that's true, but I'm not going to go into it now because I'm trying to talk about the foot washing. But of course, that's what we go through. But as there's a caveat or a prerequisite for that is to pass it on. Pass it on at the same time. So you will experience it in the depth of your practice. You might even see it as a second active imagination, which is like a transparency over visual. And these are just signposts. You don't take them as fundamentally anything but signposts and flags of things. But yeah, I've talked about this before in lectures. I probably don't need to go into it, but you might notice something like the vision of Ezekiel very transparently for people that are deeply doing these practices for long periods of time. And what is that? It's the second vision that Christ is talking about in the second miracle, when he heals the blind man. And he says, "You've both seen me and seen me." I can't remember the exact quote. 2 visions. And so we're going to find a spot here, and I'm not sure exactly where yet, but we're going to read our Steiner book. And so you experience that's just a symbolic thing that you might experience. But of course, it's happening all the time. You're doing your practice. Things are going on unconsciously without you realizing it. But where you do realize it, where you do see it, is in the will, which is, you could also call a spiritual contraction. And why is that? Because all your desires are tied up with the things of the world, that you have goals set and the provokings of the things that you've been made to be interested in. That's why. Those things have to be dissolved first, and when those things are dissolved by Christ, while you're doing your practices, they are, of course, they're tied up with will and energy. And so your will becomes weaker. That's one thing you'll notice. Your will becomes weaker in this process. And that fluctuates. It's not just a total thing. It fluctuates. It fluctuates between contraction and expansion, as on the vertical and the horizontal. You contract on the horizontal. What is a contraction? It is, of course, it's when you are resisting different temptations that you have of the flesh, of principalities, and also, well, later on, of the hierarchies of the left, And of course, as you advance in this process, to begin with, of course, as the saints say, you're helped by divine beings. It's not firstly, you're dealing with the desires of the flesh. They're the easy ones. They're the ones that it's pride and the will to power. And then that's connected with the hierarchies of the left. They're the harder ones that come much later in the process. Of course, Christ helps you with all this. Now, I think I might have found our table where we'll use and do our reading, but I do want to, I'd rather not have people around. There's no one around that table. I might either go over there or over here. Maybe there might be something else through here though. Just want to see. Probably not. I will get there, I think. Okay. Yeah, I think this will be it, actually. So what was I saying? I don't know if there's anything else through here. There might be. I'll keep walking. And so we were talking about purification, temptation, foot washing. This is a process that happens every morning. It's fundamentally to do with, like I said, it's the relationship of the above with below. And over time, you're slowly, little by little, learning how to do it yourself. Of course, this is a process that happens very slowly. It begins with, you can begin with the simplest thing, which is, we must remember these things aren't to be duties and rights as the Enlightenment European thought had them to be, or it became in the West. The whole point of this is for it to become, it's not I who lives, but Christ who lives and acts in me. And so the best way, really, to start with this will to service, I was hoping there'd be a seat down here, but it doesn't look like there is. Oh wait, is there a seat? Maybe, hang on. There might be one. I won't have a desk to use, but maybe I can mount the camera in a comfortable place. Okay, this is kind of cool actually. Yeah. So yeah, that's what we're trying to achieve. And this is all right, hey? This would be a good place to do our reading. I mean, I wanted a table, but we won't be bothered here by anyone. Might as well be in the wilds here. It'd be kind of nice to go kayaking on the water. Although that would, of course, risk destroying the camera. Hopefully no one comes while we're doing this. But, all right. Yeah, we're going to do it here. Let's put that down there. And so that's what we're after, of course. It's not I who lives, it's Christ who lives and acts in me. Where shall we put this? Oh yeah, I mean, that'll work there. Yeah. Okay, how does that look? Oh, it's got a bit of sun there. Yeah, that should be good. I'll have the book there like that. What have you got? Have you got this? Yeah, you got that. You got that. Yeah, good. And I'll have my book there. Okay, and so we were saying the foot washing. I'll check the chats actually. I should have a look at what's going on. Make sure it's all still working. God bless brother says, HMFOG, I thought game theory ultimately says evil will win because it's willing to do anything and goodness isn't. Well, usually they simulate strategies, but of course these aren't, when they simulate something, they're not complex phenomena. They're using computer simulations of very simple things. But, sorry, just looking at myself there. Looks pretty good. It's a good camera, this. And yeah, so in those simulations, from papers I've looked at anyway, well, because they do a thing called the prisoner's dilemma. I mean, this isn't usually the subject of this channel, but I guess we do both, don't we? It's the union of faith and the knowledge of things. They do the prisoner's dilemma. The strategy usually is not to cooperate, right? But that's only in one game. The best thing for you to do is to betray, because you could be the one that, because the person that betrayed gets the no prison time at all. If you cooperate, you get 5 years. If you get betrayed, you get 10 years. Because it's two prisoners in the situation that the cops have something on and they're trying to get one of them to admit it. And if you betray the person is the smartest strategy in one case scenario, because you don't know what the other person's going to do. Because the other option is if both of you don't betray each other, you share the 5 years. Or you have 5 years each. But if you both betray each other, I can't remember the exact scenario, but the point is, when the games exceed one game, when reputation is something that is part of the system, the best strategy is a forgiveness tit for tat. If someone betrays you, then you go to their behavior. You go, okay, that person's reputation shat, now we can't trust them, right? If they do it once. Now, they put that strategy in simulations up against, this is a bit beside what our usual subjects are, like I said, but they put that strategy up against in simulations, which aren't complex human beings who have connection to the divine, but for however complex the simulated beings are, which is not very, the best situation in the reputation multiple game scenario is not tit for tat, where if someone betrays someone, then that person's not trusted and you betray them every time. Otherwise you trust them. In a multiple game scenario, it's better to trust them, right? Because of reputation. But the better strategy is a forgiveness tit for tat in that scenario. So someone betrays you once, then you actually forgive them one or a few times. Maybe it's once or something, I don't know. But that was the one that won in the simulation. It's an interesting result, but it's just game theory, it's just a simulation. As we know in economics, you can't predict ultimately you can't ever ultimately predict what a human's going to do because he has contact with the divine. Even in a person, in a very rudimentary way, the Lord is sending hints to us, to you, even before we're purified. In fact, in the process, you will notice things that were said to you later. I mean, only a few times have I looked back and then asked and had the intuition to confirming that it was him. But I didn't recognize that it was him at the time. I just had the gift of tears with it. I didn't know what it was. But I was in contemplation. I went into a meditation and what was said to me was, welcome home. I don't know why I would ever say that, but I had the gift of tears immediately after that. I don't know exactly why. It was in a particularly dark time for me, but That's just I'd never experienced that before. It's only later that did I confirm that it was him through the whole process I outline in with the epistemic principle very carefully. And this is a good rule, actually, is that you don't assume it is. Because I see people, particularly some forms of, and this is not to be critical, but some forms of evangelical Christianity where they're just taking whatever words are spoken to them as the Lord. Well, you can't be sure, can you? You can't be sure. You can't be sure it's him. You have to use the epistemic principle to prove it over time. And that's the development of discernment. But I'll get our book out for today. So this is what we're reading. It is Steiner's The Redemption of Thinking. Probably do this for about an hour and then we'll make our walk down to Empress Falls. This is kind of cool, actually, in the sense that I can kind of walk around with this wireless mic and read it if I wish. Well, not if I do that. Not if I do that. Not if I do that, friends. Although that's also a risk of the camera being knocked over. Alas. What do we got there? There we go. Cool. Cool. Okay. Lovely spot for reading. Linda says, beautiful view. I always forget what HMFOG stands for. You can see me there, right? Yeah, you can see me. Good. Now, hopefully the wind doesn't knock this over. But we've got some people here. We're going to begin our Steiner reading for today and not knock this over again. Okay. Get my soda. And we'll go on, we'll continue our talk on the Passion. I got through quite a lot of it in the first half an hour, and again, I apologise for that, for the stream being just the intro for half an hour. I was talking during that time, but the scene didn't switch over. But I talked about a lot more of it then. I got through a few of the steps of the Passion up to the scouring we were talking about. But on the next part of our work, we'll get there. We'll get there. All right. The redemption of thinking. Pardon me. A savage. Only a savage would boat like that. Disgusting Australian. Okay. Oh man, I hope I'm pretty sure I did. Lecture 2. Yeah, that was it, I think. I think this is where we were. How's that look? Cool. Anyway. And so we were talking about last time, these lectures have talked about the emergence of the thinking of Aquinas coming out of Aristotle, but also Augustine, and Augustine coming out of Manichaeism and Platonism, and how those, I guess there will be people coming here, but we're going to do our reading here anyway. Those people, well, what influenced them and influenced what occurred for them, but also the change in consciousness through the development in that period, how Augustine was really a trendsetter was someone who was, not a trendsetter, he was ahead of the development. He was developing the changes in the person towards individuality, whereas Plotinus was someone who was a hangover from a previous age. In that Plotinus had spiritual experience with collectively. He saw the ideas gnostically, gnosis, almost descending, as if he's at the bottom of the ocean. Collectively though, as if each soul is like a cup and the water flows out of a collective water into each cup. He actually experienced that. Whereas when Augustine was investigating Plotinus, he couldn't actually experience the thing himself. He was only going off the theory of it. And that didn't fit ultimately. And of course, because it doesn't work since Christ came, everything changed. And so here we are with our reading. And so we pick up now talking about Scotus Origina. We finished off the last stream in the reading talking about the dual path of, wind's picking up here. The dual path of, might lower this a little so the center of gravity is better. The dual path of Dionysius the Areopagite, the path of apophatic theology, and the day path. And so the nameless is what we were talking about. And so I might even read a bit into what we were talking about last week, which is really talking about the two different paths of Dionysus. Which is then you have, this is talking about the negative theology part of it. You must forget all the names which you are accustomed to give to things, and you must transpose yourself into a condition of soul in which you know nothing of the whole world. If in your soul you can reach this experience, then you are experiencing the nameless. Which is such that if you attach any name to it, all knowledge of it immediately disappears. It's like attaching a concept to something, which is true. There is a sense that Aristotelianism, that grasping scientific investigation, covers over the true. It's a different mode of being. It's almost a Luciferic mode of being. It's initiated by doubt. It's no longer inspiration when it's Aristotle. It's a probing, pushing into the things, and definition. Definition really is just the build-up of more and more dialectic and logos, more and more looking at the boundaries and limitations, circumscribing in the speaking. Because a true speaking is letting the thing speak itself. And that is what Aristotle does, but we're stuck with what he did after that. But you go deeper and deeper behind that, where you're not even speaking it at all. You're not even, well, there is a mystery to the speaking, the self-expression of the logos, the word, of things before they're pre-disclosed and defined and dead like they are in modernity. But what we're doing is not just looking to the essence of nature, which is a mystery and is a powerful spiritual experience, but we're doing ecstasy and ecstasy at the same time. It's getting outside of nature, to the divine, to the internal, or at least to be in communication with it and him. Though when they are doing those investigations, when that's being disclosed for the first time, or at least for Plato knows it as the memory of it. Aristotle doesn't really have a memory of the original spiritual experience of creation, or the archetypes sort of helping manifest how things are, of inspiration basically. He's in an analysis mode, and that's what this book is also talking about. Just thinking where we picked this up from. Let's take it from Scotus Origina, because you can just go back to the other stream when I'm describing the two different paths of Dionysus, or at least Rudolf Steiner's understanding of it. And so the writings of Scotus Origina more or less disappeared until later days, when they were recovered. In the 12th century, he was declared a heretic, though that did not mean as much then as it did later, or it does today. In spite of this, Albertus Magnus and Thomas Aquinas were both deeply influenced by the ideas of Scotus Origina. This is one of the influences from earlier times which we must recognize when we consider the essential teaching of Thomism. There is also another influence to consider. In Platonism, which I've tried to describe to you in regard to its cosmology, and I sort of just outlined it a little bit there for you, there's a very important presentation of the nature of the human organism, which is derived from a material, supermaterial point of view. One acquires respect for these views when one rediscovers them for oneself out of the basic facts of spiritual investigation. It must be admitted that if anyone, without preparation, reads anything like Platonism or what has come down to us of it, it appears somewhat chaotic and intricate. But if one discovers the corresponding truths oneself, and the views in question take on a quite different appearance, in spite of the fact that the form in which they were expressed in those days was quite different from what it would be today. Plotinus is dealing with the problem of the relation of the physical and spiritual psychic characteristics of human nature. He considers it from two aspects. First of all, from the point of view of the creative working of the soul upon the body. I will try to express Plotinus's argument in more modern terms. If he would have said, you consider a child growing up in the world, you will notice how its body gradually matures. Now, that body is the direct product of the spiritual psychic element in the child. For Plotinus, everything which appears in the form of matter, especially man, is, if I may use the expression, a sweating out, or a crustation of the spiritual psyche, or spiritual psychological, you could call it. In other words, we are concerned in the first place with the spiritual psychic activity of which the bodily form is created or fashioned. From this point of view, the physical human organism is the product of the spiritual psychic. The other aspect arises when a human being has reached a certain stage of physical growth and the spiritual psychic forces cease to work formatively upon the body. So it's stopped at that point. When a certain stage of maturity has been reached by some part of the living human physical organism, let us say, for example, the part on which those forces of the soul have worked, which at a later stage appear in the forces of memory, then the soul forces, which hitherto have worked upon the body, make their appearance in a spiritual psychic metamorphosis. How beautiful is that orange sun when it penetrates out of the clouds? It's almost more beautiful on a day where we see the pooled light make its way cutting across the landscape. The chiaroscuro, the contrast. We have a better value for it sometimes when we see the other side. Yes, they say of windy countries there's a higher suicide rate. There's also probably a higher contemplation. It's just people don't take it as the right clue it is. Let there be light. And so, on metamorphosis. In other words, that part of the spiritual psychic element which in the first place functioned in a material way now, when its material work is finished, liberates itself from its relation to the material and appears in an independent spiritual psychic entity. These are the two aspects of the relationship between the spiritual psychic and the physical which Plotinus presents to us. it is extremely difficult to convey these ideas with our modern concepts, but I will try to explain it in this way. I don't know if I've actually read this part before, but I'm pretty sure I dog-eared it. You all know how a human being, when his powers of memory have developed, is able to remember in a way that was impossible to him as a little child. Where have his powers of memory come from? In his earliest years, they were at work in his physical organism, actually forming it. When that work was completed, they were liberated as a pure, spiritual, psychic forces. As pure spiritual psychic forces. They continue to function in the body, but now in a spiritual, psychic way, as memory. They have become what Plotinus would call a soul mirror. And finally, within this soul mirror, there dwells the real kernel of the human being, the ego. These two aspects of the life of the soul are worked out by Plotinus with a wealth of description and in vivid concepts. In the first place, that of the active, formative working of the soul, and then that of the soul as surviving its activity and becoming, so to speak, passive in regard to the outer world, so that, as it does in the memory, it receives and retains within itself the impression of the outer world. This twofold work of the soul was derived from the feeling and world outlook of an older level of humanity. Like I was talking about before, it's something that Plato would better have understood, or some of the elites of the time. Not Aristotle, but Plato. Obviously this was after Aristotle, they're Neoplatonists, but so it came to its final expression, final end point. Remember, as I mentioned earlier, Plotinus was a hangover from an earlier age. It came to its final expression in Plotinus and from him passed on to Augustine and his followers. Rationalized and expressed in more physical concepts, we find this same view of human nature in the philosophy of Aristotle, in physical concepts. 600 years before Plotinus, Aristotle, in his turn, got the view from Plato and from the earlier sources on which Plato depended. Depended. When we read Aristotle, we can see that he is striving to express in abstract concepts what he found in old philosophies. He doesn't have any memory of it. Plato does. In fact, if you believe Steiner, the Germanics actually had a more living connection to it. For the Greeks, it was just a memory. Obviously, originally, it wasn't just a memory for the Greeks, but I'm talking about the later Greeks. It's still the atavistic clairvoyance, though. It's still the thing that needs to be purified. Thus, in the Aristotelian system, what continued to flourish right up to the day of Albertus and Thomas, and which expressed in a rationalized form what Plotinus expressed in an intuitive way. You see, there's a rationalized, there's a different way of speaking when it comes to something that's a gnosis and something that's mystic. It's not I who lives, but Christ who lives and acts in me is a mystic statement, not a Gnostic statement. For instance, a lot of John, well, some of it's cosmic, but it's both incredibly intimate and cosmic at the same time, which speaks to what Christ is. An incredibly intimate person as well as the cosmic logos at the same time. And so, like I said, rationalized form in Aristotle, what Plotinus expresses in an intuitive way, we see, as it were, a rationalized mysticism, a rationalized description of spiritual secrets of the human being. Now, Albertus, of philosophies, he's reading someone else's philosophy and speculating and abstracting. Now, Albertus and Thomas were conscious of the fact that Aristotle had reduced to abstract concepts something which others before him had received in direct, intuitive perception, which of course, that's what we're after. And we're trying to escape this hell world of modernity, this hell world rigidity of, doesn't mean we're going towards truth. We're not abandoning truth at all. But there's a dead fake, the certainty of modernity and the rigidity of the crystallized concepts are fake truth anyway. Scientism infects everything. But anyway, intuitive perception, and for this reason they do not stand in at all the same relation to Aristotle as do the present day philologists. This latter have developed strange controversies over two conceptions which are found in Aristotle. Owing to the fact that the writings of Aristotle have not come down to us complete, we find both these conceptions in them, without any statement as to how they are related to one another, a fact which gives room for greater difference of opinion between many learned disputants. Two ideas are to be found in Aristotle side by side. In the first place, he sees in human nature something which brings into unity in man the vegetable or vegetative principle, the animal principle, the lower human principle, and finally, the higher human principle. Something in human nature which brings into unity those three things. This Aristotle calls the nous. The scholastics call it the intellect. On the other hand, Aristotle differentiates between the nous, poi or poeticus, nous poeticus, and the nous patheticos, between the active and the passive spirit element in man. And if you want to go to what I'm doing at the moment, there are a lot of prerequisites to this reading though, understanding Heidegger, but no one gets to the depths of the original wording and thought of the Greeks, and especially Aristotle like Heidegger does, and that is especially true of his book, The Basic Concepts of Aristotelian Philosophy. And what he's doing there, he's not articulating his philosophy, what he does, and sort of what Steiner does in a more general way, is what's really going on with Greek, this openness being? What is it that we want to see? What is philology, which means to love logos. It's the original wording, not a philosophy as a old representation of old philosophical problems of logic to learn Aristotle, not to learn a propositional system, but how do we get it to the being, at least get it to an understanding of how it presences? How do we reword it to get a sense of how this openness space, this here yonder being that we collectively are, when you look out to something, you're interacting with it. Your consciousness, your being, it extends there into the openness space. It's extending all the way to me now. The logos is a collective word. And in Greek times, that logos self-expressed collectively. It speaks almost in a mode, it speaks and self-expresses itself without even a word coming out of my mouth. Of course, collectively we do that. I speak about it. I say lake, shiny, boundary, limitation, and I describe the things that, well, if Aristotle, you're staring at it, there's a certain type of definition, defining that occurs. But initially it's a self-expression of something. That's what we're trying to get to, that original self-expression of Greek logos. And that Greek logos, well, and Steiner is to a degree here too. That Greek wording, collective wording, its intelligibility and speaking without anyone saying anything to begin with. Then we share it together and I speak about it and circumscribe it. The logos is also like a scanning of the thing and its boundaries, is a defining. But there are two different modes. The scientific or the philosophical mode is that scanning, that circumscribing, but that we are the only being, Dasein, we are the only, you and I, who share this collective space and also are this collective openness space, this here yonder space, this knowing space that gives form to how the being of the world expresses itself. We give form to it, it gives form to us. We are it to a degree as well. And for the Greeks, it was also a collective phenomena. And that's what Plotinus also talks about. The ideas were out there with the things. They're not internal. The concepts aren't internal. They sort of disclose with the things of the world. Or they were anyway. There wasn't this internalness. And so there are two different modes. There's a customary mode, which is basically when the things of the world, there isn't really a presence. For us, when we think and we look at things like you are looking at this video right now, it's present to you. We have a kind of permanent presence, a presence. It's torn away from the thing of the world, this openness space that we are. Really, before Aristotle, before a defining takes place, before philosophizing takes place, there's more of a mystical participation in the things of the world. But even then, customarily, there's a customary, ready-to-hand nature of operating in a world that is only tied up in use. It's a use world of the things that the Greeks are interacting with on a daily basis, but it's all implicit. There's a customary understanding of everything. It's not made explicit. It's definition for the first time that Aristotle, his mode that he brings to fruition, it's not dialectic. Dialectic is a first run through. This almost a self-expressing of the logos, or the word of itself, that's what we're actually trying to get to. But the customary then becomes made explicit. And so there are things in the customary that you can examine to get a sense of what it originally looked like for the Greeks before philosophy started to rigidify it, before the definition changed everything. And so Heidegger tries to do that. Because it's questionable as to how much he actually, how much he could actually get his seeing of the world to presence in the same way as it did for the Greeks, as a perspectival knowing, as a perspectival appearance. Because that can, as far as you can do it to a degree with preparation, through wording, through analysis, because most of what Heidegger is operating is a kind of word reinterpreting. And you can get there through a spinning words around, by using being, because being is a multifaceted word and also a multifaceted, mysterious thing to observe. Being, it can be many things. And so when you start to use it in many different ways, you can break down to a degree the concepts that are in our mind that have rigidified the meaning of being, or how it presences. So there's a degree to which, and you can do that just by almost like a language game, a language rewording. So the project is very important, but you only get so far with that. You reach a stage where the preparation's over and you must begin actually looking to the depths of the psyche and doing, contacting Christ and going through purification. Then what comes alive is what's underneath the senses. Then your world actually starts, you still see the things of the world, but over and across, it's two seers in union, if that, well, it will make sense when you start doing the practices we talk about. But there are already clues in what you see, to, like visual snow, for instance. That's a clue. It's not what you think it is. It's like the border of the unconscious, the border of active imagination, you could call it, as I've talked about before. But yeah, I digressed a bit there. Let me just have a drink and we'll continue our reading. Still interesting stuff though. That book's called Basic Concepts of Aristotelian Philosophy. And that doesn't mean, again, the basic concept, oh, I'm going to teach you the basic concepts. It's a getting the original disclosure that he's talking about when he mentions something in metaphysics, not just going off the definition. It's getting underneath the definition. To get a sense of original concept making. Because the trouble is we've got all these R concepts in the way. Okay. And so, now Albertus and Thomas were conscious of the fact that Aristotle had reduced to abstract concepts something which others before him had received in direct intuitive perception. And we kind of explored just then what that was. Explored that. I'll just check the chats for a bit. Lovely spot for reading. Just Catholic things. Water is a mirror. Looking deeper within as we look at Christ. Exactly. In fact, looking deeper within, we actually get closer to him because he is the very essence of the subject and the object. So you're not just going to some place in your own soul. Yes, it's subjective or it's personal to begin with, but through purification, you what's arbitrary in you begins to dissolve and you become more objective and move towards him. It takes time, but it's not as long as you think. I mean, I've talked about it. If people can just get to the point where they can give an hour of their time a day to worship and prayer and concentration, just start with something small. You could, a few people do it for half an hour on their commute in the morning and then another half an hour in the afternoon. But you could just start with 30 minutes. You can start with 5, but you have to get up to 30 minutes and ultimately you have to be doing an hour a day. But I guarantee you it'll happen. With doing other things as well, you have to also forgive everyone and all the other stuff we talk about. Look at my lecture on the practices of Christian mysticism. But where were we? The wind blows where it will. Yes, exactly. Exactly. And, okay, let's keep reading here. We'll go to... How long have we been going? We got started at 1. It's now 2:45. Oh, we've probably been going that long from your perspective, though. Anyway, let's keep reading. And so, and for this reason, they do not stand in the same relation to Aristotle as do the present-day philologists. So 2 ideas are to be found in Aristotle side by side. In the first place, he sees in human nature something which brings into unity. Yeah, I've read this part. There's a unity between the vegetative, the animal, and the lower human principle, and finally the higher human principle. Nous. He describes 2 different types of nous's, like I said, active and passive. These expressions are no longer as descriptive as they are in Greek. Nevertheless, we can use them and say that Aristotle differentiates between active understanding and the actively working spirit of man. He differentiates between active understanding, the active working spirit in man, and the passive understanding. We shall not understand what he means by this until we get back to the origin of these 2 concepts. Just like the other forces of the soul, the 2 kinds of understanding in Aristotle are manifest in a metamorphosis of their own, in the building up of the human being. For in Aristotle, the understanding in a practical work of building up the human being is not like the memory in Plotinus, which, you will remember, first completes its creative work and then liberates itself from its creative activity in order to appear as memory. So Aristotle, practical work of building up. Plotinus, complete creative work, then liberate. In Aristotle, the understanding continues its creative work on the human organism all through life, as the understanding. That is the nous poeticus, which in Aristotle's view individualizes itself out of the universe and continuously builds up the body. This is none other than that active body-building soul of Plotinus. On the other hand, that which, according to Plotinus, liberates itself from its creative activity, then only exists in order to receive impressions from the outer world and to relate logically the impressions it receives. This is, for Aristotle, the nous patheticos, the passive understanding, the intellectus possibilis of scholasticism. These concepts presented to us in scholasticism in keen dialectic and precise logic are derived from what had survived from the teaching of the past. We cannot properly understand the working of the souls of the scholastics unless we take into consideration this intermixture of the age-old tradition. It was because these concepts were alive in the souls of the scholastics that they were confronted with the great question that is usually regarded as the special problem of scholasticism, the problem of knowledge and reality. In earlier times, when men still had powers of vision which produced such philosophy as Platonism, or Platonism rather this time, or the rationalized, diluted version of it in Aristotelianism, when as yet the consciousness of individuality had not reached full development, these problems of scholasticism could not have existed. It only could happen in that time because the development of the human being had reached a degree we're not the same as we were. It's not just from thinking that that happens. There's a development, a spiritual development going on. Some would say that it's gone in a negative direction for most of modernity now, since we tipped over the point where there was positive development. But anyway. So they couldn't have existed back then. For the words understanding and intellect, in the restricted sense in which we use them today, are found for the first time in the terminology of scholasticism and are the product of man conscious of himself as an individual. That's not the case for the Greeks. Not in the same way, anyway. The concepts do not appear for them under throw. They don't come from within like they do for us. And we must also remember that the people that are philosophizing are the elites. And even for them, what they exist in is still different. The presencing of this openness space that we are is different for us than it is for them. The development's different. To such a man, the fact that we think alike is due to the fact that all individuals are constituted alike, and that the understanding is bound up with the individual organism, which is similar in all men. Of course, inasmuch as we are separate individuals, there are differences in our ways of thinking, but there are shades of difference with which logic as such is not concerned. Logical and dialectical thought is the product of the common human nature of mankind, differentiated among individuals. Man, having become conscious of his own individuality, feels that it is in man himself that the thoughts arise thereby. He gains an inward representation of the outer world. I mean, you might even see some of this as a bit, even the development has changed now from when Rudolf Steiner was alive. But we still kind of, for the most part in modernity, presence like a Kantian as a representation. I think reading Heidegger can change it to a certain degree. Postmodernism may change it to a certain degree. Eventually, as Dugan has posited, and I think is probably true, and Apocalypse may describe, is that when it's talking about the Whore of Babylon and all the lights going out and the things that the Whore of Babylon presents, the riches not being there anymore, in a sense that speaks to, because the Whore of Babylon is about the low desires of pleasure. So there is a truth in this idea that the openness bubble at that time for the collective of people who aren't the chosen, who haven't gone to Christ, the conscious open space will shut. And the desirous, because it's desire that keeps it open. It's the longing for something beyond yourself that opens the space whoosh, that this is. Anyway. At least for that type of open that is modern open. Inward representation of the outer world, and that it is from within man that images and thoughts are correlated in such a way as to give a picture of the world. For he feels that mental images themselves also emerge from within man. In the first place, those which are connected with individual objects, such as some particular bull or some particular man, say Augustine. And secondly, other inner pictorial experiences such as dreams, which are not a representation of external objects or events. Beyond these, again, are the images of pure man-created fantasies, examples of which the scholastics saw in the centaur and similar ancient chimera. That's not always the case, though. There is such a thing as an antediluvian monster, an illusory object. As Jung well describes in his book on UFOs, they're a projection of a false spirit. So they're realized untruths. And so that's why radar might reflect off them and then they quickly disappear, for instance. Or a hallucination can be a realized thing that reflects light and radar or whatnot, but it's not ultimately real, usually quickly to dissipate. But such a thing is possible. Anyway. And there are theoretical reasons that I'm not going to go into right now. But, okay, yes, fantasy pictures. Beyond these, again, are the images of man-created, fantasies. Confronting these images are the concepts and ideas which illuminate them all, both objective and subjective. As, for example, humanity, the lion species, the wolf species, etc. Concepts and ideas, archetypes, universals. These concepts and ideas, according, he's about to say that, according to the established usage, the scholastics call universals. All of them, to the man conscious of himself as an individual, appear to arise in and out of himself. Not so for the Greeks. And not so if you develop the sight or the intuitive perception and spend long enough staring in the same place. As Goethe experienced, you can actually experience the archetypes in the things of the world behind them. Because what is an archetype? It's a being. They're beings. They're spiritual beings. That an angeloi is, the ultimate prototypes, for instance. All of these, to the man conscious of himself as an individual, arise in and out of himself. You remember that in an earlier condition of humanity, which I describe in the first lecture, when man raised himself up, as it were, to these universals, like I was just saying then, they perceived them to be the lowest boundary of the spiritual world, which was revealing itself through them to the direct vision of mankind collectively. It's not from within as an individual. It can be seen in the things of the world. To those men, the universals, humanity, animality, lionhood, were simply the means whereby the spiritual world, the world of thought reality, was revealing itself in them. Their own souls were, and in them their own soul was experiencing an emanation from the super sensible. Not a great word for today. Transcendent, let's use, world. In order, however, to have that experience, it was essential that man should not have acquired that consciousness of individuality, which later develops, which, as I have described, developed in later centuries. For the consciousness of himself as an individual led man to say to himself, it is we ourselves who raise ourselves from the things of the senses up to the level where there are other realities, more or less abstract, yet also derived from and existing within our own experience. These are the universals, such as manhood, lionhood, etc. Now, the scholastics realized quite clearly that the question of the nature of the universals was not answered simply by saying, as the nominalists did, the universals are merely our ideas, generalizations from the things of the world, just a comprehensive picture we make of the external world. On the contrary, in regard to this question, the scholastics felt themselves to be faced with a problem with which they had to grapple. They formulated the problem in this way: we cannot help creating out of our own individual consciousness these general concepts, these universals. But when we look out upon the world, we find there not manhood, not individual men, not wolfhood, but individual wolves. On the other hand, we cannot apply what we formulate as wolfhood and lambhood to the material substance of which individual wolves and lambs consist, so that at one time we speak of matter as lamb substance and another time as wolf substance, as though lambhood and wolfhood were only different combinations of matter, and the only reality in the combinations was the matter of which they are composed. The following illustration shows how impossible it is to do this. If we caged a wolf and saw to it that for a sufficient time, sufficient for its whole substance to be transformed, it ate nothing but lamb, and then it would consist entirely of lamb substance. But it does not thereby become a lamb. The material substance makes no difference. It remains a wolf. Wolfhood, therefore, is something that cannot be simply and entirely related to the material substance. For from the point of view of matter, this wolf is entirely lamb. Nevertheless, it remains a wolf. This problem of the nature of universal ideas is still unsolved, but it is no longer taken seriously. And so in that, there are three different understandings. And we're not going to get to the bottom of that right now because it takes too long to go into it, but there's an idea that the horseness, the archetype of horse, or the category of horse, is the Platonistic view is that it's, or even, well, our view too, is horseness is anterior or before the horse. For Aristotle, horseness is in the actual individual horse. And for the nominalists, or the Kantian, horseness is abstracted. It's a concept of the mind. So on that, I think we'll make our way down to Empress Falls now. Maybe we can continue the reading down there. Hello, doggy. There's truth in all those three positions, actually. Well, two of them anyway. The nominalist, realist position. It doesn't really matter so much for the problem of horseness, but it does matter for the problem of us. Because who's the ultimate? Well, you have to go into a long rational argument for showing how those archetypes affect and give form to things as they present now. But you can see it retroactively in Christ, is that he's the perfect archetype that we're moving towards at the end of time, eternally and contemporaneous with all of temporality.
And so ultimately they're outside temporality. Anyway, that's complicated. All right. H.M. Fogg says, I'm probably not quite bright enough to qualify as the audience this deserves, but man, do I love what I can understand of it. It's something that comes of, you listen to again and again and again. It's also something, an understanding that comprehensively emerges for this stuff that's really difficult. So you don't have to worry. It can impel you to learn more. You don't have to get everything that's being said. There are things happening in it that become more clear. It's not something I understood straight away either, but it's, of course, it's more helpful when it's put down as a proposition on a piece of paper that you can read many, many times. But yeah, I mean, these things can also be looked up. The problem of nominalism and realism. Also, Valentin Tomberg talks about this too. If you look in the book Meditations on the Tarot, he talks about, and the solution to it, and why Christ is the solution to the problem. But there are truths to both sides of the argument. Because the Logos, cosmic Logos, is the ultimate universal of everything. But the ultimate universal became the particular of particulars, because nominalism is talking about the individual horses are all there are. There are no universal horse. But the realists would say that no, this is all a de-evolution from the fall, animality and all of that. And that's what I believe too. And that becomes clear. You just have to slowly logic your way into it to understand how that happens and how that both agrees with and disagrees with the regular scientific shit-lib scientism worldview. Because the particular, the personal matters, the individual matters. It doesn't matter so much for horseness, but it matters for man as an archetype, as a collective. Because if it's just the collective, then you end up with collectivism, you end up with race and just that on its own, and the individual doesn't matter. But Christ is both. He is the prototype, and these are a bit Platonic words, he is the prototype particular, which the nominalists talk of, and ultimately that nominalism is the individual and matters, but he's also the universal at the same time, the cosmic Logos and the perfect man, which shows you that your relationship with that universal isn't as a principle, is it? Because you don't die and sacrifice your life for, you're not going to sacrifice your life like the apostles did for a principle, for communism, whatever it is, right? I mean, you can get so obsessed that you're not going to sit there and be tortured, you'll back out. But you will if you experience a true and real and personal divine being, which is Christ who lives and acts in me. That's the state we're after, right? And we interact with, in our practices, a real divine being. A particular, not a principle. You're not going to die for a principle. Even a principle that's a powerful mechanical driver of a process. No, it's a personal, real being who also incarnated. And so Christ actually solves the dilemma of nominalism, realism through his incarnation. He's waiting at the end of time for us to reach him as the perfect man, as the prototype. Again, he's a divine being, but these divine beings and his angeloi are prototypes and archetypes. Again, these are Platonic words, but they're beings. This whole process, what we go through, is to not abstract like Aristotle, even though we understand abstraction and we operate it as well and conceptualize, but go through everything that we go through, not to be like the metaphysical jugglery or juggler who deduces from the things of the world concepts and principles. No, we contemplate, think, and through initiation collaboratively, concentration without effort in prayer, look through the things of the world to the beings behind it. That's Hermetic or Christian Hermetic philosophy. That's actually true philosophy, because Steiner would have said, and even Aristotle, they redefine what philosophy is. They say a philosopher is someone who does this thing called definition. It's the new mode where we create this rigid propositional superstructure of concepts, and we look into the causes of what sticks out and discloses itself in being. That then becomes the philosopher, but actually wrong. And so Steiner about that. The true philosopher actually is, like I've said many times, and Tom Berg agrees with this, he takes it in the other direction. And, because Plato becomes a mystic at the end. He's not for when he's doing all the writing, but the seventh letter shows that. I've talked about this before. But that's the true philosopher, and that's the Christian Hermetic philosopher. Because the other person is just operating with the dead bark. They're not looking through to the essence of things. They don't have the comprehensive mysticism, direct contact with a real divine being through the faculties I've talked about before. They're just abstracting based on the analysis at a distance of being, not getting to its essence. And even just like Goethe did, simply staring at it long enough, not moving your eyes, you will notice things about the thing that you repetitively stare at. There is spiritual things going on with how you interact with the world. Without even doing these practices, some things happen if just by staring and concentrating long enough without moving your eyes. Being feeds back upon itself. They're sort of the first practices that people recognized, like Goethe recognized, but that's still almost in a kind of, well, it's kind of the philosophical mode I'm talking about, but it's not mysticism. But the world can reveal things through that. But what we're after, of course, is the deep, pious experience, because that's the truth. We've already had generations of Europeans operating in the scientific mode in spiritual matters. The truth of things is, well, we need a resurrection in our way of being. It's more important than just Europeans, but we need to actually go back to the truth and to have a rejuvenated, through Mary and the Lord, if it's their will, to have a Greenwood again, at the roots through mysticism directly from Christ, following his divine will and getting as many people as possible in contact with him to the degree that they can discern what he wants them to do and can ask questions. That's the whole point of this whole project, is to do that, to help as many people do that as possible. Not just the gospel, the death practices as well. And so let's go walk down to Emperor Falls now. That was a good rant. All right. Oh. Nice view, eh? All right. I think I'm gonna have to go to the bathroom before we... I might just put you on my chest for a bit. Oh, yeah. Don't need to stare at me while drinking my drink.
There we go. Okay. All right. There we are. How's that looking, friends? Where are we? Find a bathroom. Okay. I think this is a bit of a bush park here. I don't know whether we're going to be able to discover a place to go to the bathroom. Probably looks nice though. I might just turn the camera off and go in the bush. If I can find somewhere off to the side. Yeah, I'm going to do that. All right, everyone, I'll be back in just a moment. Bear with us. And our live broadcast continues from the Australian bush. All right. Oh, I don't even know where we're going with this. Where does this go? Oh dear. Hopefully we still have signal here. Yeah, where are we? I think the road's close enough by. It should get us to where we want to go, I think. Yeah. All right. All right, friends. Let's make our way down to here. This is where we're going. Directions. Whoa, you're telling me to go on a 50-minute walk. Oh, wow, you're telling me to walk that way too. I guess you can't cross the train. That sucks. All right, I guess we're walking that way. 50 minutes. Well, that'll be all right. Damn, I thought I'd be able to cross this train line. Guess not. Sucks. All right. Should be back online now. We'll continue our talk on the passion. All right. Where are we? Let's check this is all still working. Seems to be still working. Yeah. Maybe not. Seems to be lagging is what it seems to be doing. There seems to be an error here. Let me just reset it. Something seems to be going on. Oh no, maybe it's working. Bit delayed maybe. Okay. Seems to be working. Maybe I'll just quickly reset it just in. Well, it should be back in a sec, hang on. And we'll continue our talk. Thanks for sticking with us, friends. Came on a bit late today. The train was delayed. And also we were, like I said, we were recording for half an hour. Sorry, I was speaking for half an hour with the intro mode on. Anyway, we're here now. And we're going to now walk to Empress Falls and see where all this water comes out from this lake. And on the way, we'll talk about more of Christ's passion, perhaps some of the stuff we're talking about, and anything you want to also bring up. Feel free to send chats through. And perhaps there's been some videos that you've watched during the week since our last live stream that you want to discuss. We may even try today when we come to a close. If you're in the fellowship, you can jump over to the Discord and we'll just have a group chat that it'll be streamed, but so people can participate in speaking, not just in chat. And so if you want to join that, go to scottmanu.com/fellowship. If you're already a member, we'll do that. And so send any links for videos, we'll comment on them. And whoever might be in the voice or video chat in the Discord will also comment on them. Plus also people in the chat, I'll read out the chats later for those videos. And so we have about a 50-minute walk to where we're going. You can probably see here on the phone, we're going down there. We have to walk around this road first, through Wentworth Falls. Okay, so we go down there. I can basically check it again once we get over the train line. All right, put that away and we'll continue our speaking. Here's the lake we were at before. There's a bin. Oh, there's a bin down here. Or is that a bin over there? There's a bin over there. And so we were talking about the foot washing. And so that's the first thing that happens to you. And you have to be willing to pass that on. It can't just be about you. You will be tempted by thoughts. Thank God I worked out how to do it. Thank God I worked out how to do concentration without effort. It's not about you. It's about all of us. Of course, it can be confronting. Christ can be confronting. It was for me in these practices. Of course,
with charity. We're concerned and tied up with ourselves. But the mission of how you can help, it doesn't mean you have to go work in a soup kitchen. You have certain talents that the Lord will put to use in what you do. Some people are made for that sort of thing. On the other side of things, it's something the Lord builds up to very slowly. It's not about so much a top-down. You can do it this way. People do it this way. But it's not so much about a top-down push. It's not so much about a go to a soup kitchen. That is a way to do it, though. That is a valid Christian way, collectively. Because I think C.S. Lewis said he tried to do it on his own initially, but he had to do it among other people. And that's truth to that too. You should go to church. But in this process, through the depth practices, depth prayer every morning, you start very slowly and the Lord leads you up very slowly. So you don't have to be intimidated by this idea. It's not going to all happen at once. And it's not going to be forced on you like a duty. Love, the force is with you. Force as in virginal zoe, as described in the Bible, which is, you could consider kind of like a virginal energy that comes from the eternal. It's not derivative energy like bios. It's from outside. He enters you, and naturally the low desires of the world are dissolved little by little, and your relationship becomes a direct thing through, like I said, as a mystic fact, through direct experience. You want to, naturally. But it starts with the most basic of things. Blessing other people. Like I know I've said that a million times, but simply ask the Lord to bless people as you walk past them. That's all you need to do. How many people aren't prayed for now? Because remember, the Lord works collaboratively. So every prayer matters. And so it's funny how many people benefit from the prayers of the people who are now chosen because they've accepted Christ. How many people, atheists, Satanists, people that have done dark and horrible things, that don't even realize that they've survived or things, whatever it is. And it's due to the prayers of the people that are, they don't think that, of course, but it is true. And so that's what it begins with. You do a great deal by simply praying for other people, by asking the Lord to bless them as you walk past. That is forgiveness. That's, in its basic sense, that's all you really have to do. But naturally, through doing that, you want to do more. And so again, you don't have to worry. It's a transformation. He comes and joins you. And his drives and impulses, as you become more good and the good becomes you, as you become more love and love becomes you. And so through that, and it's a solitary road. So, you know, I mean, I don't involve myself really with that many people, of course, you know. But like I said, the prayer's enough. The main thing is that as a whole, you pay your debts, and also as a whole, your talents will be used. It'll be something that you're made for. Of course, Poverty is natural to that, though. It's important to not be, if we want to be rich in Him, we have to first withdraw from the world. And that foot washing allows for that. But you can't, your feet aren't going to be washed if you're constantly being infected by and pushed by the world and its imagistic power, and are not willing to dissolve the false gods you already worship. If you don't do that, you don't withdraw from it, you can't have your feet washed. But fundamentally, this mode of foot washing is entirely different from the Vilsemat, where the lower serves the higher. And of course it's to be this way because at the end of time, cooperatively, it'll be people cooperating, the principle of cooperation, rather than the principle of the war of all against all. It's pretty nice down this street, actually. You can imagine when the leaves are in spring, that it will look good. That's my alarm going off. Yes, fundamentally a different mode. But again, it's not. It is how things are supposed to be, but governed by divine will. It's not a matter of trying to do it like a communist system, trying to force it. Sometimes the good is a stern father. Sometimes the service is not giving someone something. Sometimes the service is, like I said, a stern backhand. It's going to require, it still requires warriors. That's the problem of sanction. The Crusades, right? Christians don't not defend themselves. It's really the important thing is that when you do things, when you are sanctioned to do things like that, it's of divine will. Of course, He protects His people. The real point of that, though, is getting it out. If some sort of thing is to happen like that, that it's not because of the desires of the empirical subject. It's the rule of initiates, the rule of monastics, the rule of the priestly is ideally, sometime in the future hopefully, true kings who can discern divine will. That's how it's supposed to be, the proper social order. And it was once for a time. But it's not a king or a priest doing things for low reasons, at least in the ideal, anyway, how it's supposed to be. The proper rule is, and that's what, with the coming of AI, we need to, you're only providing the proper service if it's divine will. Because you get muffled up in you really do get muffled up in, you get muffled up in your own desires. Muffled up in self-justifications after the fact, when you really don't know what motivates certain things. When you try to rationalistically do this, when you try to rationalistically go through an initiation process, a purification, elimination, union, you get over heady about it. Where's that desire coming from? Why am I thinking that? How do I stop this? Over analyzing conceptually. That's solved by just doing. That's solved by doing the prayers. Because He will tell you. There's too much, I think, of certain Christianity. A lot of Western Christianity, actually, can be like that legalistic, confused analysis, when it's really a matter of it will become clear through more the depth practices. Thinking is important as a part of preparation, but you can definitely get muffled up in your own personal psychological analysis And you see this in the therapeutic culture, actually kind of comes out of that. Psychoanalysis, the weird tail chasing of psychoanalysis that occurs, which is kind of why I call it shit-lib demonology. Or you could consider it in the sense of, well, not including Jung, but sort of like J demonology. And so that still goes on. That's always going on throughout the process. But there are fundamental lessons that you've got to learn in that. But then we move on to the scouring. And that's also something that we experience in the process. Because the foot washing is the relationship of the upper and the lower, and you're the in-between. You've got to not sacrifice the lower self. You're not abandoning it like the yogis. You're serving also in the foot washing. You're serving your lower self. You're leading it like a sheep. And it's an important way in terms of how to treat yourself. At least when it's not the fallen hierarchies, when it's treated like your soul, you're leading these, just as a way of thinking about it. You're leading it all back to the Lord. There's a better way than Vilsamak. There's a better way than low desire. There's a better way than doubt. There's a better way than those modes. It's love. Divine love, though, not this low understanding that we have of love. It's also a masculine love, which I've described a little bit there for you, in terms of sanction, and also in terms of earlier today, I talked about mercy as a difference between Plato's judgment and episteme, being of the past, an intuition of all the past of a judgment and all the past of what happened, a comprehensive intuition in a judgment, including providence. That's where true objective consciousness comes into a judgment, and that's masculine, actually. Masculine mercy is what we actually really need to understand. Providential mercy. A mercy can be to not help someone. A mercy can be all sorts of things, but it's masculine. That toxic empathy we have to do away with. But mercy is to do with, it doesn't actually come from you as the empirical subject. It's to do with your relationship with the Lord and his sent intuitions based on what you should do to that person in the judgment, based on what they could be, because he knows ultimately what the essence is of that person. When we talk of other people, when the Lord says don't judge, he's not talking about the judging we do all the time. That's fine. We're constantly judging the phenomena of the world. He means don't judge in essence. Don't judge their future of where they're going to be afterwards, after they die, and their future. Meaning, say you see someone, they're doing something bad. You don't say, you're a madman. You judge the action simply, you're acting like a madman. Because you don't know ultimately their essence. And ultimately their essence is actually not just episteme, not just of the past as Plato's intuition would be able to see of the judgment, but also their future. That's left to the Lord. So it's not, we've got to get rid of toxic empathy and be really wary of that. People misunderstand what the Lord's saying with not judging people. That's not what he means. You act madly. You're acting like a madman. The thing we avoid is judging their essence ultimately, because we don't know. We save that for an intuition from the Lord. We save that for
Again, not the faculties of the empirical subject. We're supposed to develop towards Christ so he can tell us how to judge them or what they're going to do. Say if there's a court case, for instance, what their punishment should be, what to do with them, because he knows ultimately what their essence is, what their thinking, what their soul is. We don't do it. These are complicated problems, friends. Very complicated. I think we're over the train line now. And so, I don't know where it's faster to cross. Let me just navigate here. Directions. Okay, this way. Great. Might be a bit of traffic noise, a little loud. That's kind of nice over there. It's nice up here in the Blue Mountains. And so that's mercy. And really, that's what we need. I don't know what that future looks like. I don't know how long it'll take. All I know is we need a true rejuvenation of people, especially now, and I think more people are going to see it, of the depth faculties. So we can have this contact with true intuition, with true conscience, directly. Because divine beings outrank mortal beings. They know the truth of things. You want to know how to fix the world? All the theories we see. All the theories, political theory, all the magazines, even by Christians. Political theory, how to solve our problems against the left and the things that have gone on. These are all not with the divine directing what's being written. They are the natural talents and faculties of the people that write them, true, and they ultimately come from the Lord, that's true, but these aren't things that are guided by divine will and consultation with mercy, consultation with providence. And that's what we need. It doesn't just happen. It's a very real relationship. It's not an ephemeral thing. It's not if that's the right word, it's not a non-specific thing. That's of a low kind of Blavatsky 19th century woo. No, it's a very specific, very concrete way with a margin of safety, with a criterion of truth, rigorous, but also deeply alive, wary of spiritual deception. And so the next step you face is scouring. We're dealing with the relationship of the higher lower. We're not sacrificing the lower self. We're ennobling it. We're not sacrificing the higher self to lean into the Willsamacht, to will to power. We are becoming like Christ, who is God and man at the same time. He ennobles ultimately and saves the empirical self, you could say. And so, scouring is the relationship between right and left. The right hand should not know what the left hand is thinking or doing. I can't remember what thinking. That's another quote. What does that mean? The left hand is Luciferian. The right hand is satanic. What these forces ultimately want is a kind of oscillation between the hypnotic objective and the subjective seduction. Subjective wounding, objective attack. They want it to be you to be like a pendulum between those two things, not even knowing what's going on. They want ultimately for Willsmacht, or will to power, to flood into the intellect. Because naturally the Lord gave us the intellect. We do wear a kind of crown of thorns, which is the intellect. We do ultimately wear a crown of thorns. That space, we need that third space between the left and right to be the dwelling place of Christ. We are, to begin with, protected from the invasion of the will at the ground, because we have an arbitrary will which is infected with the Willsmacht in the first half of our life, naturally. And what happens with Nietzsche is he identifies with the wrong way around, and it invades the intellectual space, the third space between the two right hands. And so what happens is you end up with what the false Holy Spirit is. It becomes just a pawn and tool of this lower being, not the empirical self, below that, of just the will to power. And that's what Nietzsche's Zarathustra is. Nietzsche's not writing that. Nietzsche is subdued and gone. Zarathustra, who is actually Ahriman, is who's writing Thus Spoke Zarathustra. That's the will to power is writing that. It is, his intellect at that point is a projection from the unconscious of the subconscious rather than the transcendent consciousness. And so, yeah, he's in mental illness at that point. And Nietzsche even talks about being being burnt out and electrified in these moments of inspiration when he's writing this. But instead of being rejuvenated and lifted and healed by the inspirations, he's burnt out by them, electrified. And I know that feeling, a bit of it, a little bit, because that's what the fallen hierarchies come with, that electricity and numinous but electrified fear, nervousness, polemical energy, confusion, because it's the energy and the power of that combative war of all against all. And so he is possessed by the will to power. And that's who's writing. It's not even Zarathustra. Zarathustra as a historical character, it's not Zarathustra speaking, it's Satan's or Ahriman speaking through, who is actually Zarathustra's opponent. Zarathustra's opponent, speaking through, Satan speaking through his mouth. Cockatoo's beautiful bird, no? See you later, friends. And so that is what mounting the throne is. You're actually not mounting it, it mounts you. If you go as far as he did. Wow, look at that. So beautiful. Huh. It mounts them. In a way, it was a great sacrifice for us to learn that, what Nietzsche went through. So the fighter for freedom showed us the problems, but what not to do. The not solution. Definitely identified the problems though. And so those two sides attack. They are experienced to begin with, scouring internally as temptations during your practice. They're experienced, and you won't recognize it. You think these thoughts are yours. They're not. You've got to get into your head to be very wary of what thoughts come to you, especially during the practice. Any thought that says you've got to do something else, anything that gets you to try stop early, anything that tries to entice you with some idea, it'll be clever things, great ideas that can help you and help mankind while you're doing your practice. Ignore it all. This is preparing you. Your morning practice prepares you for a day of temptation, prepares you. And every temptation is part of this practice, is part of the scouring, this whipping. It's a very small version of what Christ went through as an attack from the world. And you also get attacked from the world too, by the way. But it starts internally. Once you begin to make the internal changes and resist the temptations, then the people of the world will be provoked by demons sometimes to try destabilize what you're doing, to try to destabilize the changes the Lord is making in you. And you just note it. There's nothing you can do about it. You just don't be provoked by it. It'll occur in your external destiny, because it's all about your destiny. It's about your sin and the karma and the bad things you've done. In the morning practice, the practice isn't just about the concentration in prayer. That's part of it. The actual practice as well is the knowing of temptation, like I've said. Every time you know, so if you think no to a temptation, these bird angels, the angeloi, you expand on the vertical as a way of thinking about it. Well, there's a church. Why don't we visit it for a second? While we're here. Presbyterian church. Still sandstone. Looks nice. I think I've come here once before. Yeah. Every temptation resisted is in the practice, during your concentration without effort in prayer, leads to an expansion on the vertical. Because what is that? It's a contraction on the horizontal. You have these desires on the horizontal to do things in the world and provoked from the world. Each time you know them, you say no to them in your mind and go back to what you're doing, equals a reaction of the eternal. It's not a mechanism though, it's about collaborative, it's washing of the feet, but the angeloi will and the Lord respond. And you expand and develop on the horizontal, and you're developing all these faculties slowly. See a cockatoo? And so, yeah, and what is that? That is the inner scouring. You also experience, like I said, the experience of the lessening of will in the contraction. Also, of course, you experience mourning. There's a holy mourning to do with this in this process, but it's sorrow and joy. But you will go through sorrow, but know that in the sorrow of the development, when you're going through, just understand that, as St. John of the Cross says, the Lord is closer to you, and it's because of the weight of that, of what he's doing in your unconscious, because of what's low in you, that feels that way, of course. But in the sorrow and in the mourning, is a deep, it adds proper meaning through the synthesis of death and life to the happenings of everyday life. Through the sorrow, do things reach their true weight? Remember, the Lord went through the sacrifice, became one of us, and ennobled all of this. These are all now divine things. This human experience. Well, it's divine experience, actually. Things become the divine, not the low emotion, but not bestial instincts, but divine instinct. I'll just check where we are. Oh, we actually have quite a while to go on this walk. Let me look. Oh, yep, turn right here. Perfect. I'll just check what the signal's like. Good chat, though. Okay, yep, looks to be still coming through. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this beautiful Australian afternoon in the Blue Mountains as we walk down to Empress Falls. Bear with me as I check. We've had a good chat there, but we'll continue our talk as we go. Make sure this is all still coming through. Yep, we're good. All right, friends, back to it. Okay. Can I say at the moment, wonderfully, Bram, a lovely, spiritive, devoted young Dutch man, I believe, from the Netherlands, is now on a pilgrimage. He's one of the Greenwood Fellowship members, and he's now deeply doing the practices and now on the road, walking every day, walking to Spain. And so pray for him, for it to be productive, as every morning he does his practices and prayers on this journey of development. But well, how wonderful, how wonderful. It speaks to, I think, especially for a young man, walking and moving is really important. Of course, this way isn't just contemplative, it's active. It's both at the same time. You expand on the horizontal too. That's when the work comes in, when you know what you are also to do, but also in prayer, in talking to people, in walking. But it's not a contemplative's life, it's a passive active. That's Jesus. He's not fleeing upward. He's ennobling all of it. And so, I do think it is an important thing, walking. That being said, you don't have to have the European beautiful churches, because you can, if you don't do the contemplative practices, the concentration without effort, as I've got lectures on, if you don't do this, you have to do it. You could go across the world with prayer, of course. You could go across the world to the most beautiful churches in Rome. It'll just be a shitty tourist destination to you, like it is for most tourists that go there. What you're after is experiencing the depth of the place you visit. And you can't get that unless you do your daily practices. It opens up everything. You'll be stuck in hell world. Everything will just it'll be the surface view of everything. So it also speaks to poverty. Say you're in Australia, New Zealand, Africa, South America. I saw some viewer from Chile earlier in the chat. Well, we don't have these old churches, but also the Lord is everywhere. You don't have to go anywhere if you can't. it can be a great benefit to go on a pilgrimage. But if there's no pilgrimages where you are, he's beneath the boring world that you've overlooked, the place that you don't like anymore, that, I live in a shithole, as that I talked about before. There's some video I saw about some Englishman saying that. He's there. What you really need is to find sacred space. And that's at the ground of being. You find that by, as the Lord says in the Bible, going into, what does he say? And closing the door. That is going into the tabernacle. You've got to go in to the house and close the door. That's the only way any of this unlocks, friends, is sabbatical, withdrawal, concentration without effort, closing the eyes. Concentration itself is, and how to do it is described in the lectures. In prayer, bringing watchfulness to the breath as well. That is also part of the eyes closing, because your attention is moving away from everything towards the ground of the psyche, towards Jesus. It's pretty nice, hey? I always like a long road that sweeps. You can see a depth of things. A long road. Hear that? One thing we're blessed with in this country is incredibly beautiful birdsong. What a time. What a time. As it becomes, what a time to withdraw. What a time to look to the essence of things. But how beautiful is the golden sun at this hour as it appears. The wind moving in the trees, symbolic of that spirit behind things that moves with everything. The glimmer of the hint. Because you can never be sure without going to the depths. That allows for you to ask, was that you, Lord? Was that? Because you see a synchronous event. You need an epistemic principle to confirm it. It was him. Sometimes it can come with its own inner certainty, but the whole point of this is to know when he is moving, when he is speaking, to know when it's not him, to know when it's temptation and trickery. That's part of it. But we also need to bring the true life to things. And so, friends, we have to do this practice. We just have to overcome through love and through help and prayer. Pray for it. Help me be able to do this for 5 minutes a day and slowly make my way up, Lord. Help me. Help me find the time to do it. Often, though, these excuses that come to you are just trickery, demons. And so you go, oh, that's extreme, thinking that they're demons, thoughts, demons. You're better off thinking this way, even if it's not always. Be wary. Notice that every excuse that comes up, wow. I'm not the only person that talks about this. C.S. Lewis, I think, talked about it in the screw tape letters. And be wary. And so that's the scouring, that's the inner scouring. And it's such a gift in the morning. Facing temptation, even the fallen hierarchies, having to experience the devil, the fallen hierarchies, not to talk about this subject that much, but well, you do have to say it. It's not something that's wanted, of course, but put it this way. If you don't experience them, then it's most likely, Or you could go even further in this. If you're not experiencing the temptation and you don't experience the fallen hierarchies, well, guess what? You're obeying them. Meaning, if you don't notice the temptation, you're already falling to it, because they only don't tempt you because you're already obedient to whatever desires that you're after, you see. Or you just don't notice. Noticing is good, as the saints say. I think they say, was it St. Andrew? I can't remember the exact saint. No salvation without temptation. It has to be. And what a wonderful thing to get used to also this process in the morning, friends, which you go through in a scouring, which is multifaceted. Like I said, part of it's mourning and spiritual contraction. Also, eventually you will contemplate the passion itself and Christ's passion. And then you'll get more and more an idea of experience a holy mourning of what he went through. The more you contemplate it, the more you understand it, the more the gifts are given to you of what happened to him. But what a gift it is to see the devil in his actions. You get that in the morning, and it prepares you for the whole day for what might happen. It's a watchfulness that you're learning. Again, it's many things, this practice. It's actually a practice. Concentration without effort in prayer is practicing all three oaths at the same time. And you'll come to see that the more you do it. It's easy. It's easy in that sense. And wow, I know I've said it already, but how beautiful is this sun at this time of day? And so as you become more purified, that scouring that occurs then will occur externally. But you'll be ready because you know this now. And you'll understand in a very small way more. Well, of course, the Lord was insulted, wasn't he? He was spat on and insulted and derided at the same time. Of course, this is a much smaller way of the scouring we go through. But it'll happen could come from your family. It could come from false dilemmas that are presented to you in the happenings of what you have to deal with. You'll think there's some dilemma between, I can either do this or I can do my prayer practice. Someone's challenging your prayer practice. And the truth is there's no choice at all. It's not a choice between good and evil. But you'll see it, you'll see what I'm talking about as an archetype of all the different types of things that can happen to you. Because the scouring will come externally from people you love, people you know, trying to interfere. And you do not let them interfere with that holy hour and the practice. You keep going. And if you're beginning to have intuitions, especially, of course, or if you're at the point where you're developed enough to begin asking questions, as I talk about in most recent lectures, then of course you follow divine will. At least you can ask him, though. I mean, really, I was so looking forward to giving that lecture, because this is all about getting to the point where people would be at a stage where actually, well, now it can be guided completely really by, well, it should always be in collaboration with friends, but with the Lord guiding you, not me. I'm not the master, he's the master. And so I'm so glad I completed that. Because really, if people did follow what I said there across the lectures leading to that one, it would almost be enough then, right? You could die and say, okay, well, that's there now. People know how to do it. But because it's quite hard to work out. And someone else, I'm sure, other people can work it out, but no one knows in terms of what Valentin Tomberg's talking about. They don't know how to do it, or they haven't put the time in. And I've looked at them all. These are good people doing good work in different areas, more literary work than anything, and argumentative debate, or literary, maybe you could call it scholarly, But it's not, they don't know how to practically do what he's talking about. But they do, if they follow what I do, it'll lead to what they're after. Let me check where we are. Empress Falls, friends. Scouring. Seems to still be working. Let me just, sorry everyone, I don't want to make this boring, but I better just check. I think we're still on the right route. It seems to be working. Good, good. Back to it. Okay. Okay, yeah, we'll keep going down this road. Maybe there's a pathway there, though. It looks nicer by the bush. We'll go this way. I think, anyway. We'll see. Okay. And so, yeah, I didn't go into too much detail there, that Bram is on a pilgrimage. So pray for him, everyone. He's on a pilgrimage to Spain over 4 months, doing the practices we talk about, while he's visiting these places. And the reason why he's doing it, well, of course, he's doing it because he's participating in the whole thing we talk about, but maybe we can't walk down here. Don't know. Not sure. I don't think we can. Sorry, everyone. One benefit of him doing it is he's going to be able to see the depth of all the different places he visits. The depth of life abundance. I came to give you life abundantly, not to destroy it and eliminate it. Essence of things, but with divine emotiveness, ennobled emotiveness of the depth of things. And how wonderful that'll be. Because places have a past. The modern worldview can't disclose a taste of it. But all these places have had prayer for thousands of years, 1,000 plus years. That consecration is there. As we talk about, providence is more important, of course. The Lord, the ground of the Lord is everywhere. But the past, the remembrance, the mother, goes all the way back to the dawn of time. Virginal nature, Mary Sophia. What we do leaves a spiritual marker on a place. And so those places have special miraculous life in the remembrance. Of course, we honor the father and the mother. We do the remembrance. We bring to presence what is eternal and is still with us in temporality. But we also honor the father. We're looking for providence, remembrance and providence together. And this also speaks to the crown of thorns. The next stage of the Passion is to do with the front and the back. The mother, which is connected to virginal nature, and the vital body, the vital unconscious, which has this history, this what has been, this past that extends beyond us. It in our factical everyday being, we look forward, we exist in a forward manner. The future is forward for the surface progression, progressive, whatever. In the unconscious, it's the reverse. forward is in the vital body or the vital unconscious, or is the past. So as when you do the depth practices, when your eyes are beginning to close and you're concentrating, you see the imagistic of the unconscious. It begins to dissolve to black. That's a great blessing. Remember, we're talking about that's what has to happen. The unconscious has to be dissolved. The valuation of you could call the psychological body, but also the vital body, right? So things you're seeing are actually part of that. In front of your past is actually in front of you. Underneath the surface sense of the world, though. It's when you're concentrating in your depth practices. It's in the front. The dorsal human being is the future human being. It's in reverse. And so you see that. This is also spoken to, this in how you experience mystic spiritual touch from the Lord and his unglory. It comes from, it's behind the eyes almost. So that's part of your dorsal human being. Even though the location feels like it's behind the eyes, you might see that as forward, but it's actually just behind. It's behind the ownmost. It's more ownmost than the center ownmost space that you are. Because where do you see yourself? You're the center of this space, aren't you? Your observation point of everything seems to be the center of where the eyes are, isn't it? Spiritual touch is felt sort of behind that point, or closer than the closest. And that's also the center of that, is the point you're attending in your concentration. And so those two domains that you experience when you're closing your eyes, what are you doing? You're closing off a surface sense. And that closure of skin going across the eyes also is symbolic of the spiritual touch that becomes available. What is an objective sense that's seen at a distance actually becomes a sense of touch, which is the closest you can be to the immediacy of touch it has. That the closing of the eye speaks to it becoming like a felt sense, like the rest of your skin. And so this future, what was I saying? Yeah, we'll keep walking here. Almost there. Oh, there's a nature trail. Maybe I should have gone that way. Poo. Oh, poo. Oh, poo. Anyway, it's all good. Dorsal, front, These two areas, the dorsal and front, in the fall, it's the domain of, in the rear direction is fear. Because the rear directions, you're kind of held out from the nothing, which is behind you, if you think about it. As the existential being that you are before you become an essentialist, before you connect to the ground of your being, to him, you're thrown into the world. At the ground or near the bottom of that thrownness is an abyss, which is your being towards death. You're going towards death. There is an existential space that is an abyss that you can't see. It generates a primordial fear and terror that you don't really notice. You notice these things, a grounding fear and a grounding shame at the bottom of your psyche when you do these practices. But in your daily life, you're so distracted with the things of the world, you don't notice you have this basic anxiety, primordial shame. Those two things, shame and fear, shame is about your sin and your past, but those two things are what punctured us out of in the fall, archetypally anyway. Shame and fear, the rear and the front, are supposed to be moral courage to follow, and moral courage back, and front, What's that again? What's the opposite of shame? Reverence. No. Opposite of shame is courage, and reverence is what fear is replaced with. And so ultimately that has to be overcome with love and through the practices, of course. But it also reestablishes contact with the unconscious in the dorsal and the front, with the ground of both, the essence of both. And so you notice that in the experience of grace. You will, hopefully, if you do these practices, one day will notice, one day, and this is the helpful part of the lessening and dissolving of your will, that's a good thing. When you notice, oh, I'm very depleted from this, or mournful, or from the process, that's good. Of course, because then you're going to notice when what's connected to you experiencing something peace, deep, divine peace in your practice and prayers. You're going to notice after that, after an event happens in your morning holy hour, in your morning prayers, in your morning prayer rule, you're going to notice a difference between the lessening of the will and then suddenly, say the next day, say if you're at a gym or whatever, that there's something is sort of impelling you from behind. Grace, when even just walking up impels from behind as well, dorsally. Say even just walking up a hill, you'll notice the difference when you're in a state of grace. And what it is that there's a divine will there with you, and you don't have to put the draining energy of your own will into something, and you can actually even relax on some days, relax your willing, and my yoke is easy. They're in the meaning, or one meaning of it. Of course, that's not permanent, that's not all the time, but these things become more and more. Of course, I mean, it becomes a thing in which you pray for, you begin to pray for everything. Every morning, if you need energy for work, ask Him, Lord, I pray Thee for the virginal Zoe to do the work today. Lord, I pray Thee, beloved Lord, for your word to flow through me in the speaking of this IRL stream today, before you do anything. And more you'll start doing that, because He's responsible for it. And the more you get closer to Him, the more it's not your arbitrary will, and the more it becomes a matter of requesting, following Him, but also requesting every time you do everything. We're almost there, friends. I'm not sure we'll go to 6, but we'll go to the sites anyway. I'm getting a bit tired now. I don't have any caffeine on me either. But we'll probably go for maybe another hour, or till 5. There was a cafe. We were supposed to arrive here earlier. There was a cafe. There is a cafe, but it's closed now. Closed at 3. But there might be a lovely area though to sit, or I might be able to get a drink. We might continue a bit of our Steiner reading, or we'll go to the falls first. But once we get to the lookout, we'll continue. But yes, that front and back, the crowning of thorns, is to do with that. Front and back, human being. Yeah, that's right, isn't it? Crowning of thorns comes after scouring. And I might I'll see if this cafe is open, but I might put you guys on my chest so I can just walk in. Oh wow, here we go. Here we are. Valley of the Waters, it is called. And so the crowning of thorns. Wow, this is actually a good spot, man. Look at that. Look at that, friends. Perfect time too. Very pretty. Oh, they really closed this off, do they? How annoying. Maybe they'll go home by the time we get back. We return. And so you have to deal with that shame, guilt, and fear. This process requires courage. I really want to sit there when we come back. Hopefully they're gone, because I want to go in there. But what will happen is that also occurs on the objective. So what happens in the crowning of thorns is you begin to experience the true spiritual experience. The faculties become awake because you've dealt with your fear and shame. But this spiritual experience you gain, oh, how wonderful. It's not for you, just for you to have your joys. Oh, it's an hour return. That might be a bit long. Might go to just the Victoria lookout. It's a responsibility, friends. If you're going to do any of this stuff, it's a crown of thorns. And so speaking about this stuff too, what does it do? It generates shame and fear in others. And so when people attack you, it's due to that a lot of the time. It's due to a secret shame that they feel, or a secret fear that the possible truth of Christ reveals to them. And so that's why you'll find it'll happen in your destiny, in your against you, if you decide to talk about the truth of this experience. Luckily, we, of course, have a very careful epistemic principle, which allows us to talk about these things in a rigorous way. But yeah, let me see. We'll go to the lookout point, and we'll come back. But let me just check it's all still working, because we're in the bush a bit here. Seems to be still working. Let me look. Yeah, it's working. Great. All right, everyone, let's go down to this lookout. See if it breaks up. All right. Yeah, the old Empress Falls are an hour away. The sun will be setting by that time. All right. Well, we might have fixed the color issue with this camera. For the record, well, I guess no one needs to know how to use this camera. But it's about turning some modes off. Shortcut track, Wentworth Falls picnic area. Easy, 20 minutes. Let's just go to the lookout. Go this way. Wow, a wonderful quiet there is, friends, here. Just the movement of the wind. It's kind of nice when you come to that. And especially a wide open space, which you can see a bit to my left, but you probably wouldn't be able to see very well there. 30-minute walk. I don't know. Lucky I do all that Like I do all that Stairmaster. And we'll see how far, see how we feel in about 15 minutes. See how the signal goes. Might not survive. All right. And so, yes, shame and fear in others, but also you have to deal with your shame and fear and your guilt. And that comes through what, of course, this purification process is about. Well, your fear. You have to face your fear. You have to face, in these practices, it awakens memories. It awakens the things of your past. It awakens what scares you, what shames you. But also it awakens cosmic forces of the archetypes, right? Things that will, for a time, like I said, the saints talk about this. You want to do the death practices, you're going to have to go through, we're called to be saints, you're going to have to go through what they go through. The fallen hierarchies, if you're developing more, you then have to deal with them. You then have to deal with cosmic forces. And that means the numinous, things that generate fear by their nature, occasionally is something you have to experience. But at least in experiencing it, it's not secretly deceiving you. So, because they can't harm you. They can't do anything to you but scare you. They're only allowed to tempt you. It's humans that can actually, and egregores hello. It's humans that can actually do things to you. The fallen hierarchies can't do things to you. But they can tempt you and they can trick you. So, better to occasionally, very occasionally have to experience it. And this is spoken to by the apostles when they're on the ship. What are they experiencing but the rocking of cosmic forces during sleep time? So dreams can be disturbed because you're becoming less arbitrary. You're becoming less just your personal unconscious, and you're going to have to deal with the objective unconscious, not just the subjective one. Okay, let me just check the signal again, friends. Bit boring. I'm going to get an Apple Watch so it's constantly on, so it'll be easy later on. But for now, I've got to keep doing this. Seems to, I hope, still working. Maybe not. Hang on. Oh, maybe. Sorry, everyone. I know this is boring. We're in the bush, so skip ad. If the ads are coming through, I'm assuming it's working. What I can't see. Okay, yeah, it seems to be working. Or maybe breaking up a little bit. Again, I'm going to get an Apple Watch, so this stuff is clearer eventually. But I'm going to refresh this. Sorry, everyone. Reload it. Okay, it's still working. Sorry for the bore. Oh no, it's not. It seems to be breaking up actually. We'll go back. If it's already breaking up, I don't think it's going to get much better. Okay. Let's go back. Maybe they're gone now. We can sit down. Can't expect to go too far into the bush without something breaking up, right? Maybe there's another viewpoint along here. And so what were we talking about? We're talking about the crowning of thorns. And so once you've dealt with your fear and shame, you have to deal with the fear of these things. Things are being stirred up. If you want to have a relationship with the Lord and the spiritual world, you have to deal with your temptation. You also have to deal with the hierarchy. If you want to keep developing that, you're going to have to go through the things what the saints talk about. You're going to have to go through contact with these fallen hierarchies, unfortunately. Of course, you're not ever seeking it, of course. It's just temptation that comes. No salvation without temptation. And, you'll be afraid. You have to be courageous. It's pretty rare, it doesn't happen very often, but these are things you have to deal with. And like I said, the archetype of the story is dealt with with the apostles on the ship. It happens at night because these are night senses, aren't they? They're the senses of the spirit. And what happens at night? Well, your unconscious goes out into the cosmos. And so that's the crowning with thorns. And again, like I said, it's experienced externally. It's experienced externally when you're crowned with the true responsibility. The thorns that are pricking you with the crowning on thorns is the spiritual experience that becomes available. The crown is not some glorious will to power for you. No, it's you're to serve him, the Lord. And it's a crown of thorns. And representing and speaking of that authentic experience of him and his hierarchies is bound to generate fear and shame and attacks on you. So not only the thorn element speaks to the new experience, but also the attacks that come. So, yeah. But I mean, these days, any position that's presented is going to be attacked on social media anyway, so it's not like it's something that doesn't happen anyway. Okay. I'm going to look for, and next step, the next step in the passion is the cross bearing. And what is the cross? The cross is, the 3D cross is anyway, it's forward and back, like we mentioned with the crowning of thorns. It's left and right, isn't it, the cross? Horizontal, Lucifer, Ahriman. It's upper and lower, isn't it? So the three stages that we were talking about, the foot washing, scouring and crowned, we experience that all together in this stage as we bear the cross. And what is that? Well, it is the bearing of two crosses. The bearing of the cross of responsibility of what the Lord then begins to send you intuitions, and you also begin to work out how to work out what's true. And so you're bearing a higher cross above you of conscience, but he's also within you at this time. You're sort of the in-between those two crosses, and you're also bearing a lower cross. So you have to bear and carry the cross of your lower self still in this process. That doesn't end. And like I've talked about before, the experience of purification, illumination, union, it's not linear. It is to begin with. You start with just purification, but once the cup is filled halfway, the pouring pours all three cups at the same time. So you begin to be able to experience the other two, but that doesn't mean you still don't need purifying. So you're still bearing, all the way to the end, are you bearing your lower nature? Of course, it's more and more perfected, but it doesn't stop. You're still a sinner. And so those are the two cells we've been talking about. We're the in-between, let's say. The higher self, transcendent self, is what the idea that the Lord has always had for us at the end of time. You could consider the transcendent self. And so when it's a moralism, when it's a Puritan sort of moralism, it could be considered duty, right? A burden. This burden of following the religion is a burden because Christ's not with you. That's the problem. You don't have mysticism. You haven't gone through this. Then it's not a burden. His yoke is easy. But Nietzsche, what he did was create he experienced a final terminus of that transcendent self and identified with the black cross beneath him. As we said earlier, you don't want to do either of those things. You don't want to you don't want to abandon the cross beneath you. You have to bear it and ennoble it, as Christ did. Well, he was perfect, but he showed the way. We have to bear it. Suiciding it is the way of the yogi. Oops, I used that word. I was trying to avoid doing that. Terminusing it, terminating it. Final termination, self-termination. Oh dear. And so that's the cross bearing. It's all three of those things together. It's more complicated than that, but you have to keep bearing your lower nature. But he helps you because he enters you if you keep up with the practices. And so ultimately what it's not I who lives, but Christ who lives and acts in me. It's what it's all about. Paul experienced, for him, for some people it is, they can go through an instant ecstasy and it all happens at once. But the vast majority of everyone have to go through this purification process. Almost, 99.999%, because it's an important part of it. We have to do it and choose freely. Let's go see if there's anyone still in this building. You can have a bit of a view of this, friends. There it is. I can always look at it later. Yes. Cool. Well, I'll give you longer than that. Wow, we'll go up there. We'll go up there. Yeah, it definitely looks like a good place to get some food. If you're here on time anyway. But here's where we are. Ah, they're still here. All right, I'm gonna go sit down on things over here. I'll see if there's a close by viewing area that's in signal. Otherwise, we can just perch up here and do our final segment, friends. The trouble with these days is they never chop down trees to get a view, unfortunately. No. Too much environmentalism, if you ask me. Now there's no, because there's no view here. Then let's just sit down for a second and see if we can go somewhere else. there we are. I'll put you over there for a moment. Okay. Just looking if there's an alternate spot we can go. That's still all coming through. Just check the audio. Yep, 1, 2. Good, good. Happy days. Happy days. Where else can we go? Shortcut track. Overcliff Walk. Wentworth Falls Gallery. Wentworth Falls Picnic Area. Wentworth Falls Lookout. Yeah, let's walk down there. Alright, we'll walk. Shortcut track. Let's do that. Alright, we're going to give this a go. Find another spot as the sun goes down. Okay. All right. Might just put you guys on my shoulder for a bit while I think of what we're going to talk about. We can talk about the other stages of the passion, but maybe something else as well. Have a look through my notes. Yes. Oh, there's that guy. That's someone's house, I think. Yeah. Let's walk this way, I think. I think we might begin to bring this to a close, friends. We will make sure we get started on the dot on 12 and not make the mistake of leaving the stream on the intro like we did today. We'll only have a 3-hour stream then, or however long this has gone for. And we'll skip our last segment where I'm sorry we didn't get to Empress Falls. It looked like the signal was breaking up there. I didn't want to bother going down somewhere for half an hour if it was just going to lead to that. I might get a third mobile carrier and that might be enough to be able to those more distant areas. But it's been a moving day, at least for me. When we got here, it's been a journey. After we got here, walking down from the lake, seeing this pooled light and this fresh mountain air. Also those birds we went past. The Lord moves in everything. And the closer you get to Him, the more you get to see through to the essence of things, the more you come to, see His work in everything and how that work occurs. That's the whole point of it. To be able to ask when something is Him. So you have a certainty, not just a recognition of a synchronicity, but you can send that recognition through an epistemic principle to be sure that it is. As we talk about in our lectures as well. Yeah. There's deeply moving, deeply mighty, deeply profound, deeper levels of profundity all the time, endlessly, going towards Him. And everything is so much more appreciated when it's experienced in its depth. We become more human doing this. We don't become depersonalized, because humanity is made divinized by Him, perfected by Him. Through ennoblement, through bearing the cross. Perhaps next week we'll talk on the next 3 stages of the cross as we go on our walk part between the readings of Steiner and our final segment. But for this week we only got halfway through. That being said, the lesser passions, those 3, and the bearing of the cross, that's an important part, especially for people who are starting on this process, it speaks to what they'll more sooner deal with as they more and more identify with Christ. And so, friends, when shall I bring it to a close? I think it's almost 5 o'clock. If anyone wants to say anything, feel free to now. Otherwise, I'll see you next Saturday for a proper 5-hour stream. I'll make sure we don't get any delays in the trains. And we get through our full segments. We get through our full show. But for now, I bid you adieu. See you next time, everyone. Time all. Get started, do the practices. Don't waste any time. You've got no time to lose, is a way of putting it, especially as a young man. People tell you you've got all the time in the world. The truth is, you've got no time to lose. God bless you.